Good afternoon, everyone. My name is William Beer, and I'm a member of the Information Security Forum Planning Committee based here in New York. Absolutely thrilled to be here today to present the fourth in a series of 5 webinars exploring cyber resiliency in a defining moment in history. I'm really excited to be joined by my co-host, David Raviv, who's going to be leading the discussion today. Hey, David, how are you?
Hey, how are you? Glad to be here.
Great. And thrilled that we're going to have 2 really interesting guest speakers joining us. We're going to have Tal Moses, who's the CEO and co-founder of a new Israeli startup called Mikiga, which has just come out of stealth mode. And then we'll also be joined by Christopher Hills, who's the deputy CTO from Beyond Trust, who's one of our sponsors, along with Recorded Future. But before we get started, I did want to point out that, as I said before, this is the fourth in a series of 5 sessions. And if you haven't had the opportunity to look or participate in the previous sessions, please feel free to have a look at the URL on the ISF's website. And I think you will find both the sessions from Steve Durbin, who's the managing director of the ISF, obviously Siobhan Gorman from Brunswick, who talks about communication in a crisis, and Jeff Longhoffler from Bank of New York Mellon, whom we spoke with last week, talking about stories from the front lines. Extremely interesting and insightful sessions. I also wanted to point out that today's discussion is based on a lot of what is put out in the ISF's CISO briefing document, which you can find at the bottom of the screen. And then finally, before I turn over to David, I do want to mention that this is highly interactive. So please feel free to shoot us your questions. If you want to challenge anything that someone has said, drop us a note. We'll be watching the screens and we'll be integrating that into the discussion today. So with that said, I'll hand over to you, David, who will kick things off with Tal Moses. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. So I have the greatest pleasure to introduce Tal Moses, the CEO and co-founder of Mikiga, and a fellow entrepreneur. Tal, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you. How are you?
Good. It's amazing. So we met, post or actually pre-COVID, right? In New York City, we had a couple of beers at an event and, things like, wow, looked completely different back then. It's almost like a distant past right now. So, that brings me to, the first question, how things have changed for you personally and professionally in the past several months.
Well, I think a lot has changed personally and professionally. Personally, I think there's a lot of advantages on working from home. You don't have to dress up and go on based in. So there's a lot of public transport that you don't have to put yourself in, go to meetings, spend a lot of time waiting in lines and queues. So you're being more productive, spend more time with the kids as well. Work-wise, I think that it opened a lot of new opportunities of working with other countries which are borderless in similar time zones, not even the same time zones, that we don't have to fly everywhere for meetings and so on. And as I'm CEOing a company which is specializing in incident response for cloud environments and remote incident response, it actually fit quite well to those times. So I think it made our company's business model a bit even more real and adapted quickly to the new situation, to the new life. And also, I think that it helped clients to be more receivable for connecting us remotely to their environments. And of course, there is the regular negative and disadvantages of this whole new pandemic situation.
Well, it sounds like your, dry cleaning, bills have gone down tremendously since then. What do you see the top trends in the incident response containment space right now?
There's a lot of stuff trending now. I think the first and foremost would be what I call the COVID-19 bloomers. A lot of companies that because of the new situations are doing pretty well and they're a bit overwhelmed from the success, like what we saw that happened with Zoom. It's not that Zoom was less secure all of a sudden, but they were in the center of things and become a higher or more important target than they used to be. There's a lot of other companies which became the center of noise and gravitates attackers, like e-learning companies. So most students are now learning remotely. e-commerce companies and so on, they're not used to the amount of traffic and tractions they're getting, and being overwhelmed and unprepared. We see in terms of trending breaches, there's a lot more breaches to do with cloud environments, cloud misconfigurations, open buckets, and so on. A high rates of ransomwares, business email compromise, and a lot more phishing than used to be around, especially around the COVID-19 pandemic news alerts and so on. The other thing that we see is that there used to be a lot of breaches on-prem are now happening not just on cloud, but specifically at SaaS and third parties applications, which is pretty hard to deal for our clients because usually they're limited with their visibility. And we definitely see that there is a whole new attack surface. So a lot of people that are working from home are not using home work gear, so they're bringing their own devices or they're connecting their own private laptops into the organizational network, which bring a whole new kind of attack vectors because it's the same laptop that their kids will play games, so some of them will be cracked games or illegal games. Even those that have laptops which are being issued from work will start connecting them to Wi-Fi printers they have at home, which are not necessarily secured. So the entire attack surface is different as well. And I think all those trends together making this time for attackers very interesting.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You know, the digital transformation impact and the rapid move to adoption of cloud and cloud services really made a change in the attack surface. So from your perspective, in terms of where the industry is currently failing, specifically around the approach to incident response, where do you think that the gaps are, and you know, where can we learn from our mistakes in terms of that particular topic?
I think you bring up a good question. I think first, the biggest challenge with IR that a good incident response is like art. It's all about the people. And people, good people, as everywhere, are very expensive and it's very hard to scale up. And incident response haven't changed dramatically in the last 20 years. And there's, you know, they say nobody invented the light bulb. They keep improving the candles, and it feels like incident response is just being improved and not reinvented. We're still lacking a lot of automation and scaling up capabilities. There are other gaps when it comes to cloud. So there's a lot of knowledge when it comes to on-prem IT environments, but there's less knowledge when it comes to cloud, even lesser when it comes to cloud cybersecurity, and even less when it comes to incident response. So there's a big gap over there. We're still very, very reactive when it comes to incident response. And this is somewhere that I think I can see a lot of trends of changes and good change. Companies which are considered proactive are usually proactive because they have playbooks and did an exercise. I don't considering it as very proactive yet. Talking about exercise and practice, there is usually a defined crisis team or goal team at every organization. Some of them have been practicing, they did workshops and so on, but none of them, or most of them that I've talked with, haven't practiced doing a crisis management remotely, which has to be changed now. We definitely see a better collaboration between the red teams and the blue teams, between the teams that are doing attacks and testing your controls to the teams that are defending, and how they can create a common language and define stuff, which will help build the organizational resilience. We still see a big gap in how crisis is being managed. Every crisis involves many stakeholders, which are not just the IT or CISO team, but also the CFO, the CEO, the PR company, HR, and so on. They're still talking different languages, and there's a big gap there. Yeah, I think that those will be like the main gaps that we still see.
Super interesting. And you know, it sounds like the crisis is definitely putting business continuity to the test. And obviously, in your role and the company, you're assisting a lot of clients on a regular basis when they have a really bad day, right? So what does that look like on their side, and how do you get involved?
Yeah, this is true. So probably, unfortunately, half of our clients approaching us in a reactive manner, meaning they've been hacked and need help. And we've seen different forms of what's a bad day looks like. Some of them, they've been informed by a third party that they have been hacked. They haven't identified themselves. It's hurting their reputation and the time it takes them to contain it. One of our clients have their entire source stolen from a third party in the cloud. Another one is an e-commerce that had the ransomware that basically encrypted their entire endpoints, servers, everything. They couldn't work. They were out of business. Every day that they were out of business, they lost millions of dollars. Other clients had a lot of clients guys being fined by the European GDPR. We've seen stuff being stolen and sold in the dark web. Yeah, it's not nice. And usually when we come there to engage with our clients, we waste 2 or 3 days for connectivities and other issues that brings a lot of stress into the clients that have not been prepared in advance.
And you also mentioned previously that you see some stagnation in terms of innovation, and specifically in the IR space. How do you see that market currently changing, and maybe tied into, the fact that we have to change how we do things today due to the COVID-19 impact?
Yeah, so we do see some sort of innovation in the market when it comes to clients, when it comes to vendors. Definitely, we're working on a lot of innovation as well. Some of it is about communication. How do you better communicate with the different stakeholders in the companies? How you put everyone on the same page, aligning them, and making sure everyone will have just a good situational awareness. Sometimes we've seen some innovation in when it comes to automation. Um, I'm not talking about hackback, which I've seen somewhere. I'm not sure I'm okay with that, but we've seen some automation that some geolocation have been blocked automatically. Some AI being involved in some of those places to better identify and at least suggest a set of actions that organization can do in order to mitigate the attack. And a lot of innovation is being driven by the insurance market, like in any other industries, which are offering very good products today for the cyber liability insurance, if it's first or third parties. And they are hunting different companies that can lower the risk for the cyber insurance companies, meaning lowering the risk for the clients as well. So I think this is a very interesting space to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touch upon the adoption of cloud. So, in your opinion, can traditional approach to incident response be used for hybrid and cloud environment?
Um, some of it, yes. Maybe 20-30% of traditional methodologies are also good for hybrid environments and cloud environments. But it's a very different environment to investigate when you come to understand what happened. Usually, you're lacking a lot of information that you have in an on-prem. You have mutual responsibility between you and the cloud provider. You need to understand who's holding what, who has the right event logs. One of the biggest problems is that logs are something very expensive companies to hold because of the bandwidth and storage they take. So most of them are disabling them, and you're lacking the information you need to investigate. So you need to really understand what is the specific information to advise the client to keep and which ones you don't need to. There's a lot of different ways to collect evidence if you think you will end up in court. So when it comes to traditional incident response, you can just go connect some piece of hardware to the machine, duplicate it, put it aside, put it in the safe just in case you need to show it in court. It's very different when you do it remotely or in the cloud. So we're kind of inventing new ways to do so. And I think last and not least, there's a whole new different attack vector as well that you didn't have in on-prem topologies. So we have open cloud buckets, cloud misconfiguration, and so on. So it's a whole new skill that you need to have.
Yeah, it's amazing. So you obviously had to reinvent yourself in terms of providing an incident response remotely and do that quickly. I'm assuming that all happened almost overnight. So in your perspective, what are the kind of the team's capabilities unique to your company and the people that you work with in terms of providing these IR responses?
Um, so capabilities of the team is setting that attackers point. Most of them have been walking in those shoes for governments or other similar organizations, understanding how to avoid different detection tools. So they know exactly how to identify attackers, learning the systems from different point of views. They have a very deep understanding of cloud technologies, remote technologies. They have understanding of both sides of red and blue teams. And then I think a lot of stuff that comes with experience is how to digest well the lesson learned from everything we've seen so far, and quickly learning learning from those lessons and actionizing it for our new clients to make it easier for us and for them to do incident response when needed.
Mm-hmm. So aside from the team's capabilities, obviously those are unique as well, but what role does data and technology play in your specific approach to providing these IR remotely?
So I think efficiency is very important, and scaling up by automation and tools that we either can develop or buy or the clients have, and we need to know how to work with in order to give a very quick mitigation. Organizations can bounce back to BAU ASAP. I think communication is very important. So different platforms being adopted quickly. Usually you cannot even trust the communication platforms the clients have today, because you don't know when you start an engagement, you have no idea if they've been compromised or not. Maybe they are using Office 365 and Office 365 have been compromised. You don't want to use this communication platform, so you need to bring different platforms into the game. As I said, a lot of automation. And regarding data queries and data lakes, you need to know how to work with different client platforms like Splunk, like Elastic, and other players in the market. How to quickly take a big dump of data, analyze it in a very effective way, and come to quick conclusions of what should be immediate actions to mitigate and contain, and then what would be the medium-term and long-term actions based on this data that you collected.
Yeah, and you spoke about specifically about exercises. So how do you pick and choose the appropriate exercise when you provide these? And if just in terms of what to focus on, because there's just so many different scenarios, right? You mentioned, I think just during the conversation, you mentioned like maybe 5 or 6 different scenarios of things that happen. So how do you take your pick?
So basically, we know what is trending. We understand who are the threat agents to the specificity of a specific client. If it's a financial client, it will be one type of threat actor. If it's e-commerce, might be another. And then we're trying to understand what's their digital footprint looks like, and also their reputation in open web and deep web, to understand if they're an interesting target for certain groups, that we understand their patterns, their incentives, and so on. And then we basically built a bank of different attack vectors, and with different filters, we're trying to, together with the client, understand what would be the top 5, top 10, or top 20 attack scenarios which are interesting. But before we're getting into the different attack scenarios, there are things that we need to exercise which are mutual to all the different attack scenarios, like connectivity. How can we connect to the client environment in an efficient way? So we won't start dealing with that only when something happens, but be ready in advance. So this is something worth exercising. We exercise the clients on general, like how can we, in the most efficiently way, share information between us and not have 22 different stakeholders in a Zoom call all trying to be heard and hear. How do we share big data? So you need to download a lot of big dumps of logs. You need to have a platform that can hold it, that can analyze it. So there's a lot of stuff that we practice before you even pick and choose the best or the most probable attack scenarios.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a continuous learning mechanism, right? Where you take the actions that you take throughout these engagements, and you learn from it. How do you deal with that information overload? I'm assuming that every engagement involves tons of information that you extract and deal with a lot of the forces within, or the business units within the organization and so on. How do you deal with that massive amount of information that you have to collect and basically sift through while you're doing these engagements?
Basically, it's about having the right platforms, understanding very well what matters more and what matters less, and focusing on the immediate action items at the beginning, and then dividing the work. So we'll usually have more than one team working at the same time. So the first team will just do an immediate mitigation and to contain the event and to stop the leak or the ransomware or whatever it is, while the other team is trying to sift this data and to understand which data is more relevant, which data is less relevant, and just in case we need it later on, where would it be? So there will be different teams working at the same time trying to prioritize it, but it's a real challenge, and this is why we use a lot of and tools we build in-home or buy from other vendors to make it more efficient.
Yeah, by the way, these questions came from a couple of our viewers. Great question, keep them coming. What are the biggest challenges your team is currently facing, and from lessons learned from difficult engagement, if you can share with us as well?
So I think number one challenge is the connectivity. I already mentioned it twice because it is a big challenge. It can start with something simple, like we can go to a platform like Signal or any other platform which is considered secured. But just deciding on this platform is important for communication. And then for connectivity, will we access your private cloud with a VPN, without a VPN, and so on. Usually we advise our clients to have a dedicated station just for IR, disconnected until needed, that we can access whenever something happens. We already have the credentials and so on. Other challenges, even in the psychological way today, is when you do an incident response today, the organization is not feeling the cadence of the investigation. They don't see you. You're not there making noise, shouting orders and discoveries. You're working from home, from an office, depends which country you are. And every 2-3 hours, a client will stop you to ask, what's going on, what's the new status, what's the update. Mm-hmm. So you really have to be very proactive and accurate in what you do, what you find from one hand, not to stop the team which is working on the most urgent stuff to get a status update every hour. But on the other hand, you want to keep all the other parties involved very correctly. And I think if you get that one right, it gives a lot of confidence to have all the different stakeholders. If it's regulators, if it's the legal team, if it's PR, HR, CEO, CISO, and so on. Another big challenge today is, and unfortunately, 75-80% of the cases in the cloud that we're investigating, they just don't have the information we need to investigate. Logs are disabled, and we have very few of them we can investigate. And what we see today, and I think in the last 2.5 months, we see it more than ever before, and it looks like it's the biggest trend now in cloud vulnerabilities are the applicative layers. specifically those applications being used or provided by third parties. So you might use a cloud environment for your R&D to deploy your code, compile it, store it, and you might use some plugins provided by third parties. Those plugins might have some vulnerabilities or flaws in them that might be used to compromise your code, your IP, passwords, and so on. We've seen breaches coming from those attack vectors lately. And when you come to investigate it, even if the third party is aware there was a breach, usually there's lack of transparency. They will not cooperate with the victim, and your investigation is a bit limited to what you can see. You know what happened, what's the impact, but it's very hard to investigate how it happened, who's behind that, what's their incentive, and to cross, for example, intelligence that you have against certain groups that might steal information and try to sell it in the dark web. If you don't have access to the third party to understand what happened there, you just have to blindly look at the darknet for all the different attack groups that could have done it. I think those are the biggest challenges.
That's an excellent segue to kind of the next question. You mentioned the logs, right, being disabled, and I suspect there's other means of making an incident response easier or potentially just more effective after the fact. And what can an enterprise do right now to make sure that they're prepared and help, potentially a investigation after the fact?
So I think the best exercise an organization can do is to perform a threat hunt or a compromise assessment to understand if they have been compromised. While they will do that, they will have to do everything you do in IR. They will have to understand where the logs are. They will have to make sure they have all the data available for them. They will build queries to their Splunk or Elastic or whatever platform they're using for data crunching. And they can keep those queries just in case they will need it in the future. So this is a very important exercise. The other one is to do a remote exercise of crisis management to make sure you have the right communication channels, that you understand which platforms everybody can log into, which is totally isolated from your day-to-day architecture from the organization. It could be on the cloud, it could be anything else that you would like to use. And then to understand what are the roles and responsibilities of different stakeholders when it comes to crisis management, who needs to update whom, and how we all come together. What's the cadence of investigation? Do we come together twice a day, once a day, and so on?
These are excellent takeaways. So we have another question here from the audience. What does the incident response exercise look like in terms of the timelines, in terms of how many people are involved, what that looks like, for you and for the client?
So today we're doing 3 different types of incident response exercises. One of them is for C-level or executives, just to understand that the gold team and silver team knows how to respond well to any crisis. It's very similar to a tabletop exercise. Usually we used to do that on a course of half a day, bringing everyone together to the same room. Today, it's a bit harder, so we're doing it over a platform like Teams or Zoom. The attention span on those platforms is not as good as it is face-to-face. So we're doing those tabletop exercises on the course of an hour and a half, maximum 2 hours. While we're having all the different stakeholders involved, even if it's external vendors like your PR company, legal office, and so on. And at the end, you basically get a better attack scenario, option book, how to react better. You make sure that you know what you do when something happens. The other type is more technical. We're exercising together with the IT team and the cybersecurity team. We're making sure they know how to identify the most common attack scenarios or the most probable attack scenario. They can answer every one of those efficiently, and they can report it in the right means. And the third type is a fully blown exercise when the entire organization takes part of it, which is the technical teams together with the executive teams trying to respond to one or two different attack scenarios, which are very relevant to the industry they are at.
Thank you. This was excellent discussion, Tal. There's a lot of key takeaways here, and we'll share that with the participants at the end of the 5 series. And again, Tal, thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciate. Looking forward to maybe seeing you again in person in New York City. William, back to you.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate you sharing that insight with us, and thanks to the audience. I see lots of questions coming in. If we don't get time to answer all of them, as David said, we'll make sure we capture those, and those will be part of the summary document that we send out to everyone at the end of the 5 sessions. But at this point in time, I want to now bring online Christopher Hills, who's the Deputy CTO from Beyond Trust. Hey, Christopher, how are you today?
Hey, William, how are you? I'm doing well.
Good, good. Where are you connecting in from today?
Hot and sunny Phoenix, Arizona.
Hey, well, lucky you. We've got a tropical storm here in New York and New Jersey, so
Right.
we were a little worried power might go out, but so far so good. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but both David and I were a little concerned about power cuts. But Christopher, so glad you're able to join us today. Thanks for taking the time, and thank you and your organization for helping to sponsor these sessions. It means a lot to us. Maybe before we get started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe touch on your background, and maybe a question for you. Tell me a little bit about what you love, or what you really excites you about cybersecurity, and maybe at the same time what frustrates you, just to give our viewers a bit of a feel for what makes you tick.
Sure. So I guess at the foundation, I did 9 years in the Navy. When I was in the Navy, I started my IT degree. When I got out, my first major IT gig was with the Arizona Department of Health Services, working on the bioterrorism program. So that introduced me to a lot of different things, and working and consulting with numerous state agencies. Ended up dibbling and dabbling in some stuff. Went and worked with Lockheed Martin in the 2010 Census Bureau, and then landed my last major gig at Charles Schwab, for those that may know who they are, large financial institution. That's really where I want to say me as in my background is an Active Directory guy, so identity has always been at the center of, I guess, my focus. 6 months into my stint at Schwab, I found myself literally at the head of being a product owner, a service owner of PAM, figuring out strategy, maturity, taking a legacy product and basically moving it forward over the course of about 9 years. And it wasn't until the last 2.5 years of that stint where I was introduced to Beyond Trust, among other PAM vendors working with in that tenure. And I really fell in love with the company. Over that 2.5 years, relationships that I built, seeing the company and the partnership that we had, it just felt right that at the end of my 9 years, it was time to take on a new challenge. So I came over to Beyond Trust over a year ago and started on the pre-sale side as a senior solutions architect. And believe it or not, you would think as a pre-sales guy, having a commission-based salary and everything else, I only did one deal. And so I think that's where, I answer that question, what really makes me thrive in this industry. I get most of my reward working with customers, helping customers, and actually bridging that gap. Coming from the customer side, I understand the frustration. I'm not a sales guy at heart, at the core, or even have a background. And so when I go and talk to people, it's raw. And I love being that liaison that bridges the sales side with the technology side and helping them on their path or their journey as they're trying to mature their overall stance and posture. And so, at the end of the day, we really, felt it was a great position for me to move over to the office of the CTO as the deputy CTO. And that's what I've continued doing. I've continued doing webinars like this, expressing a lot of, different views, things that we're seeing from the industry, as well as, continuing to help and enable our sales folks by bridging some of those hard gaps, whether it's with current customers that are struggling, or whether it's with potential customers or even prospects, and they don't know where to go, where to start, or even how to get started. And so that's where honestly, I want to say I get my biggest reward is by helping customers, and maybe it's not always our customers, but just helping people and sharing in PAM security.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's quite refreshing. So, obviously, you heard what our friend Tal had to say about incident response and some of the challenges that he's seen with some of the clients and organizations that they're plugged into. What are your thoughts on the market, and what have you seen change over the last 3 to 4 months? And what are your clients or customers telling you in terms of some of the challenges they're facing?
Tal brought up a ton of great comments, and trying to pick any one to start. I mean, we could spend hours talking about any one of the subjects. As with everybody had to embrace this pandemic. Everybody had to embrace working remotely. And so as a result of that, there was a huge push in, telecommuting and remote access, and how do we reestablish the communication within our company and allow our employees, or even whether it's our C levels or our technicians or even our help desk, how do we connect them? How do we allow them to continue working so we can continue creating revenue to pay our employees? And so there was this huge push and this huge surge to, connect people remotely into existing networks, into, cloud the networks or applications, you name it. And so now that we've gotten through this push, both good and bad, and people are embracing this working remotely, now we're starting to see, okay, what were the mistakes made? What is the fallout of what we did? Did we make the right choice? Did we use a non-secure tool to make a connection back? Did we loosen up our bring your own device policy so much that now our organization or now our company is susceptible to vulnerabilities or risk? Kind of what Tal said, when you have personal computers and you have kids at home, teenager playing a game, using a serial generator or a crack generator on the same person, on the same laptop, I should say, that you're connected into your corporate network and doing your day-to-day business on, is not an ideal situation. And then when you couple that with, insecure remote access tools or communication applications that are being leveraged on those devices, they become and they create this widening attack vector that allows these cybersecurity criminals into those individuals. And so the second phase that we're seeing now is how the end users are actually cleaning up what they did and whether or not it was a good choice or it was a bad choice. And ideally, that's where we've seen this huge push right now. It's almost like a phase 1, phase 2. And I think the interesting part, and we didn't really talk about it much, but is the whole concept of zero trust. When we talk about zero trust and we talk about the philosophy around it, I like, when you go back and you think back 5, 10, 15 years ago, as an administrator or somebody connecting to a server, you didn't really worry about, what their rights were. Hey, you're an administrator. It's carte blanche, right? And now we're in this day and age where we've gone from trusting everybody to trusting nobody. And so I think where our focus and where you're going to see a huge push in technology as a result of a lot of the incident response, and what we're seeing is there's going to be a lot of behavior analytics around identity. I think there's going to be a lot of AI, and I think there's going to be a lot of maturity around behaviors. And when somebody is authenticating to something or somebody is accessing something, what are they doing it from? Are they doing it from a phone that's a normal phone that they use? Are they doing it from a location? And I think we're going to see a lot of advancements, because now we're authenticating people in so many different areas and aspects right now, instead of being in that traditional corporate network in an office setting. I think we're going to see a lot more progress in that aspect of it. And for us, I mean, that's great. It helps the cause, and it helps, bring to light that for us as a PAM vendor for privileged access management, everybody has privileged access out there. And, all of that privileged access lends itself as an attack vector that, cybersecurity criminals will use, will leverage, and continue to leverage. And technology is just going to grow. We've seen the huge push to cloud, and if you think about where we were and everybody trying to get to the cloud, when you take into account a lot of the big organizations and the enterprises that are out there, there's a lot of applications and legacy applications that were never designed for the cloud. And so now when we've seen this huge push to cloud, and now we're starting to see that huge push kind of taper off and kind of peak and climax. And now what we're seeing is the embracing or the adoption of large enterprises saying, okay, we're okay with separating a cloud environment, on-prem environment, and there is a place for both to create a nice hybrid amongst those. And so I think we're starting to see a lot of that now. And to be honest with you, we've just thrown this huge COVID pandemic on top of everybody. So now that throws another wrench into the mix, and we're having to jump through the obstacles and embrace the security issues that come along with that also.
Yeah, it's interesting. It does concern me, and I think again, Tal touched on it, and you underlined it. There was so much urgency to rush into a remote working model that I don't think we've thought through the far-reaching implications of that yet, and what that means, not just from a security perspective, but a regulatory perspective, a compliance perspective, and even just productivity perspective. And there are more and more conversations about that as of late. But I think of an organization that I know quite well that literally brought 65,000 remote workers online over a long weekend. And what concerns me is not just the technology that they put in place to support that, but when you work from home, and when I work from home, you have almost like a full sense of security because you're at home. And so the way you do business, the way you react to, let's say, maybe a phishing email, I think is going to be inherently different from the way you potentially react to a phishing email if you're sitting in an office, because you let down your guard. And so I think that we do need to be vigilant. I do think we need to think through the far-reaching implications. I think one of our previous guests, Jeff Longhoffler, actually said that. He said, as an industry, we're not thinking through the far-reaching implications of what we've built or what we're changing, and that concerns me. And I thought that was very insightful. Now, oftentimes, let's be frank, Christopher, when we talk about that, maybe with our clients, we sometimes get a little bit of pushback because they may say, hey, that's FUD, that's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But it does concern me, and I think as professionals, we need to reflect on that. I'm conscious of time. Maybe if you could just spend a minute or so touching on what would your top 2 or 3 recommendations be for our viewers today, maybe from an identity perspective as they think through this remote working model that we've all been thrown into, whether we like it or not?
It's tough because when I actually have a webinar that I give, and so what's funny is that I break down the term best practice. It was something that I struggled with on the client side, going to a vendor and saying, hey, we want to implement best practice. What is best practice? And I struggled with it because 9 times out of 10, the answer that I would get was, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, no. That's not my question. My question is, what's best practice, and how, I want to implement that. And so you bring up a valid point, going back to literally my process of breaking down best practice. And so, at the core of it, what I do is I try to break down, there's 3 things that truly drive what is best practice. And one of the things that I always open up and I ask them, I'm like, when we're talking about PAM, I ask the audience when we're in a normal, in-person setting, I ask them how many have, a PAM strategy that's documented. And then I ask them, are you willing to share it with the person sitting next to you? And it's hilarious because everybody's eyes get big and they're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, no, time out. NDAs aside, we're at the bar having a couple drinks. We're just talking in shop, and so it's just funny. But the core of the concept of this is that when you talk to different organizations and you talk to different companies, what is unique amongst all of them is that for the most part, they all don't have the same priorities. And at the end of the day, it boils down to those three things: risk acceptance, risk tolerance, and that overall mitigating the risks and what's a priority to them. And every company is different. You have one company that's focused on protecting secrets in the cloud. You have another company that's focused on removing admin rights, on their desktops or their workstations. You have another company that wants to protect the domain admin accounts. You have another company that has shared accounts that they want to vault and use sessions with. And the list goes on and on. And so what's funny is that for me, I turn around and I pose the question, I can give you best practice, but you got to answer, my questions. And so the idea is, to what you said, is it a regulatory, is it a compliance concern that's driving this? Is it an audit need? Did you suffer a bad audit as a result of maybe service accounts not getting rotated, or, maybe there's not enough entitlements around and having documented who has access to them? And then at the core is, okay, great, put that aside. No, those aren't driving forces. All right, so now when we start talking about, okay, do you want to do the hard stuff first? Do you want to go after what the core is, or do you want to go after the quick wins, the ROIs? And so at the end of the day, I wish I could create this magic algorithm that somebody could just answer questions and it would just spit out, exactly what you need to do based upon your input. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. So, it is that interaction piece. It is that communication and understanding what is relevant and what is important to the customer, to the client, to the organization, and understanding that. We say this, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it comes to compromise. And are we prepared to handle a breach? And that's where our risk tolerance comes in. How much tolerance are we willing to accept in the event of a breach and continue doing business? These are all things that companies need to understand and need to rationalize and document so that they know and they have a process. And in my eyes, that would even help TAL, and the incident response folks when it comes down to a breach and helping contain it and focus on it. So that way you can get back to a state of, one, recovery, and two, as Tal said, creating revenue, generating revenue. You'd be shocked the amount of, cybersecurity breaches that are out there in the industry. And one of the ones that we hear of more often than not is the primary focus right now, believe it or not, is the banking industry and wire transfers. That's been the primary target.
I really, really understand that, prioritization is a difficult thing to hit on. And I agree with you around the magical algorithm. But Christopher, I'm conscious of time. I know we're a little over already, so I wanted to thank you so very much for your participation today, for helping sponsor. And again, we will make sure that we're capturing all the questions and all the comments that we had, circle back to you, and we'll include your thoughts in our briefing document that we'll forward to participants at the end of the session. But thank you, Christopher. Have a great day. I'll bring David back on quickly. David, are you there?
Great discussion. And William, I'm really looking forward to the next Tuesday, right? This is our last but not least event with Judy Selby discussing cyber insurance. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, I'm conscious of time. So I wanted to thank everyone for participating today. Hope to see you next Tuesday at 12 o'clock with Judy Selby from Hinschel and Culbertson. We'll be talking about cyber insurance. Remember to keep the questions and comments coming. Have a look at the CISO briefing document. And thank you. Thank you all. Thank our sponsors. We'll see you next Tuesday. Have a great day.
Thank you.